In just a few days, voters will head to the polls to cast their votes in one of the most important elections the country will see this year.
That is the race for Wisconsin Supreme Court, the branch of government that gets the final say over any argument of Wisconsin laws. These 7 justices are the ones that decide whether the state's abortion ban remains in place. But there's possibly more at stake. The High Court determines the district boundaries for legislators. That sets the number of seats that Republicans and Democrats each get in the Capitol.
Now, why are we seeing such a focus on this race right now? The court is split down the middle. There are 3 liberals on the bench and 3 conservatives, with 1 swing justice on the bench. The seat that's open this spring, it's from a reliably conservative longtime justice, Pat Roggensack. For liberals who want favorable rulings on abortion or redistricting, they need to capture this seat. For conservatives, they're playing defense, trying to keep the seat from flipping the candidates.
On the conservative side, we have former Supreme Court Justice Dan Kelly, first appointed to the court by previous Governor Scott Walker. He lost his bid for a full term in 2020, along with Waukesha Judge Jennifer Dorough, a former prosecutor and defense attorney who gained national publicity during the Darrell Brooks trial. Those with the more liberal tag, Dane County Judge Everett Mitchell. He oversees juvenile cases in the county and is a pastor in Madison, and Milwaukee County Judge Janet Protasiewicz, who is also a former prosecutor. Next week, voters will narrow down those 4 candidates down to the top 2, regardless of whether those judges lean left or right.
And whoever goes on to win in April will get a seat on the bench for the next 10 years. So these are the players. But what's at stake this election? Political reporter Will Keneally has more.
We heard it all through the election last year.
This fall's elections, Roe versus Wade is on the ballot.
But now, a renewed push by Democrats and liberals to use abortion as a motivating factor, getting voters to the polls this spring.
There's just so much at stake.
Steve Webb is with Planned Parenthood Advocates of Wisconsin.
Electing a judge that, that shares our values about protecting the rights of all people is critical.
The issue of abortion harkens back to 1973.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions.
That U.S. Supreme Court ruling legalized abortion across the country, overriding laws in states like Wisconsin that would have otherwise banned the procedure. But the election of 2016 allowed Republican President Donald Trump to shape the balance of the court.
I will do my job without any.
Trump added 3 new conservative voices to the court, and that solid majority voted last year to overturn the Roe v. Wade precedent. The Dobbs decision reverted the country back to a pre-1973 status for abortion. That reactivated dormant laws like we had in Wisconsin, banning abortion in the state. But the U.S. Supreme Court left some room, saying that states should be the ones to decide abortion policy.
The first and most obvious question is, does the Wisconsin Constitution have anything to say about a right to abortion? And that's a question that only the Wisconsin Supreme Court can determine. The U.S. Supreme Court does not interpret state constitutions.
So today we have filed a lawsuit that asks the courts to clarify that Wisconsin's 19th century abortion ban is not in effect.
Right now, there are competing arguments in Wisconsin. The state's abortion ban was passed before the Civil War, but there are laws on the books passed after Roe that allow for women to receive abortions.
It can't be both legal and illegal to provide an abortion to protect the health of a mother.
And it's just a matter of mobilizing voters to sway this spring's election.
This will be our biggest effort, bigger than the effort that we led actually for the fall election.
Conservatives are working to keep that status quo in place. Gracie Skogman helps coordinate those efforts for Wisconsin Right to Life.
But we're laying out the stakes with the hopes that, of course, that motivates them to vote for candidates that may protect our current law.
In November, abortion was a significant issue, but is that energy that they can tap into again?
Got a sense of level of urgency. We've been mobilizing, youth, black and brown folks, and folks that want to get involved and make sure that their voice is heard during this election.
Abortion is not the only issue potentially on voters' minds this spring. Back in 2011, tens of thousands were descending on the Capitol Square to protest collective bargaining changes. But at the same time, a law firm across the street was laying the groundwork for the district lines underneath their feet.
So it became clear that under this apportionment, especially in the Assembly, but also in the Senate, Democrats had no chance. You could get a majority of the votes. You weren't going to get a majority of the seats. That was quite clear.
It may seem like it doesn't make much of a difference. If a Madison voter moves from an East Side district to a West Side district, they'll still be represented by a Democrat in the legislature. But shift a few key districts in suburban areas, and you can determine how many Democrats and how many Republicans are in the legislature.
Sky's kind of the limit if you're going to throw out all those sort of rules I mentioned of like following municipal and county lines. You know, you could do some really weird like pizza-shaped, like wedge districts.
There are a buffet of different options for these maps. But like picky eaters, you need to get a blue governor and a red legislature to agree on one single plate to eat. But those two are not going to agree, and that's where the courts step in.
Redistricting. The democratic process itself. If there was ever any question about the partisan character of the Wisconsin court, I think the election of 2020 kind of ended that speculation, in the most direct possible way. The Wisconsin court has inserted itself, and partly inserted itself, partly been pulled, to be fair, into the business of determining how elections in Wisconsin will take place.
The court has become increasingly partisan in recent years. The black robes that they wear now have more of a tint to them. For Democrats, if they take that open seat on the bench, it means winning an entire branch of government. That means for issues like district lines or whether somebody needs a photo ID to vote in Wisconsin, Democrats could undo many of their Republican policies from the past decade with this single election.
I have to say, I cannot think of a judicial election in Wisconsin that I've seen in which so much was riding on one seat.